okay, so we talk about both the creative and business side of things, and you seem to be on the verge of doing what I think a lot of people in my audience and who I talk to personally, like a lot of friends of mine, are most want to have. Because as I've been listening to you on some other YouTube channels, you were saying that you are on the verge of pitching the shows and trying to get those made that are the shows that you most want to do and the stories that you most want to tell.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I am at that stage right now, and as you know, I do consulting as well, and often some of the most practical consulting I give to young people who are aspiring filmmakers is how to pitch their projects, right? What are the, I just did a call with a consulting client today, and he went over log lines with me, and I was like, yeah, those don't work. Let me help you break them down and come up with log lines that do work, and we got to that because pitching is often the hardest part. In some ways, it's harder for people than actually creating a script.
So I don't think this is anything that is secret information because I heard you talking about other YouTube channels that you're talking about. The shows that you're pitching involve Moorish, Spain, and then also the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah. I mean, those are all finished projects, and each of those, the Moorish Spain project sold to a large studio, Ottoman Empire project sold to a large studio. So these are projects that were both. They were screenplays, or they were television pilots that were finished that I wrote on spec. That I essentially, the word spec, we're just writing them speculatively. No one's paying us to do it. We're speculating and hoping that someone will buy it. In these cases, they did. And so, yeah. But part of the process is also I've got other projects where you've got the script, but before they want to read the script or even to entice them to read the script, you often have to take a meeting where you just have to explain what you got. Well, pitch it out to you. What's the log line? What's this about? Why should I even spend a couple hours of my time reading your material, right? So often those are sort of the introductory meetings that you have with new producers on a new project, and you have to be able to pitch them. In my career, there are many successful screenwriters, often the ones really at the top of the system, who they don't have to write a spec script. They don't have to come up with an idea for a movie or a television show and just write it and hope someone will read it and buy it. But someone like a J.J. Abrams will just walk into a studio and say, I've got this one sentence idea, and then they'll get, at least in the past, they would give him a lot of money. I think maybe he's lost some of his cachet in the last few years, but in the past, he could just walk in with one sentence and be given, here's $100 million, go make that movie. Here's $50 million, go make that TV show, right? For me, I found that because I'm still, after all these decades, still not part of that inner club, I still have to prove myself every time. So I don't like to pitch. I don't like to pitch without having the underlying material. So what I mean by underlying material is that I generally tend to write scripts. I tend to write entire movie scripts, entire television pilots that are ready to go. And then the pitch is about enticing the person to read it. Because often they'll be like, oh, you got a project in Moorish Spain? How's that going to work? Why would anyone watch that? Even if you give your one sentence pitch or a few sentence pitches them, and they're like, well, now that I've at least intrigued you with the archetypal idea, here's the script. And then you can see how it works. And so that's what I do. And I don't know how much you could hear through the interference, but
we were just saying that in the ideal situation, you are writing these TV shows. So you're obviously the writer. Are you also going to be the producer or showrunner on these in the ideal situation?
Okay. So this is how it works in television. It's a different hierarchical structure than feature films. And the titles have different meaning. So in television, writers still have a lot of power. So the creator of the script, the writer of the pilot, even if they're not always the showrunner, and sometimes they won't be, and I'll explain why, they usually tend to get an executive producer credit, which in Hollywood tends to be, in television, is the top of the pinnacle of producer credits, right? The executive producers are the big bosses of the system, right? In movies, it's different. In movies, when you see credits of a feature film in the theater, you'll see producers' names and executive producers' names. And the people that have the power are the producers, not the executive producers. The producers are the ones that actually win the Oscar, right? So when there's a limited number of people that are allowed to take the Oscar statue at home for Best Picture, and that comes out of the producers of the film. The executive producers tend to be people that provided some important service in getting the movie made, such as they helped secure the financing, they brought in the star, they had some other angle that got the movie made, they had the rights to the underlying project, whatever it was, but they're not day-to-day involved in running it, right? And so the EP title is less meaningful in movies, but in television, the executive producer is in charge. And in television, those tend to be the writers. It's shifting, unfortunately, a little bit in the last few years, where directors are beginning to become the showrunners on projects, which I don't think generally works out if the director is not a screenwriter. But especially on in places like Disney, where I've worked at Disney in the past. That's kind of their system, and it's their system now in Disney Plus, where the directors have the power and the writers will work for hire, which is not as common, and I don't think works better. And I don't think it helps in television. I think in television is better for writers to be in charge because they have to map out the entire season. They have to map out a long-term plan, which most directors can't do unless they're already professional writers. And most directors are not professional writers. They might wish to be and resent the fact they're not, but they are not. But yeah, so in my shows, certainly at the journey that I've been on, I've, like I said, 2 decades of it. So I'm at a place where I can negotiate and leverage, the executive producer title. Earlier on in my career, they would have said, well, you wrote the pilot, we'll give you a co-EP title, which is a secondary level, and we're going to put like a real EP, someone who's had many more years of experience than you, on top of you to essentially manage the process. But I've reached a stage where I can credibly claim, to get the showrunner status, because I've done this for a few decades now. And unfortunately, there was a bit of a period in the last few years where Hollywood was actually giving showrunner power to very young, inexperienced writers. It was the flip of what I grew up with. I grew up with, you have to struggle for years before they give you the showrunner status. But in the last few years, there was a lot of people that were being, for ideological purposes, they were the right sex, they were the right gender, they were the right, ethnic thing that was needed for PR purposes. And so they would be, in the past, those people would often be given the title, but not the power. In the cases I've worked on a few shows where young people who served political purposes for the PR purposes of the show were actually given the role of showrunner, and they didn't have yet the experience to run it. So it's like trying to fly a 747 where you have never even gotten a Cessna, and it can lead to disaster. And those were disastrous experiences. So we're now shifting back towards long-term successful people like myself becoming the showrunners of projects.